All right, welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping straight into what is, let's be real, the absolute holy grail of physics. For decades, physicists have had this massive, almost impossible headache, finding a unified theory. Basically, a single rule book that can bridge the bizarre, tiny quantum realm with the massive, sweeping majesty of the entire cosmos. Well, today, we are exploring a really fascinating theoretical approach that attempts to do exactly that. We're going to break down the PHFC framework. That stands for Planck Scale Harmonic Fractal Cosmology. As we'll see, this framework lays out a unified journey that scales all the way from the foundational microscopic pixel of space right up to the birth of entire universes.
So, here is our roadmap for the explainer today. First, we've got the PFHC framework explained. Second, the dynamic quantum pixel. Third, bridging macro and subatomic. Fourth, oxygen core convergence. Fifth, the V14 interaction chamber. And finally, number 6, cosmic dynamics and syntropy. Let's get to it.
Starting off with Section 1, the PHFC framework explained. We really need to lay down the ground rules first.
At the very heart of this PHFC framework is the VORTEX model. Now, VORTX is an acronym. It stands for Valued Output Recursive Toroidal Expansion X Factor. I know it's quite a mouthful, but the core concept here is stunningly elegant. You see, in standard physics, we generally think of space as this continuous empty void, like a blank canvas. But this model throws that out and proposes the seed concept. Reality, in this view, is absolutely not an empty continuum. Instead, it's a discrete partition of infinite fractal potential. Think of it kind of like a highly specific computer program booting up from an endless sea of raw data, and it's initiated by a unique informational value derived from apparent collapse. So reality is partitioned, it's highly specific, and it's discrete.
And right at the center of this whole shebang is a single beautiful number, 1.618. You probably know it as phi, or the golden ratio. Now, in the vortex model, the fundamental pixel of space, what they call the scaling Planck unit, is not just some static constant. It doesn't just sit there doing nothing. Instead, it's a dynamic variable. It mathematically scales according to the Fibonacci sequence. So the very fabric of space itself is anchored by this elegant mathematical proportion, and it grows and expands in a totally predictable harmonic fractal pattern. Moving right along to Section 2, the dynamic quantum pixel. This is where we go from pure chaos to our physical reality. The evolution of this fundamental pixel is honestly a wild, dramatic journey. First, those scaling Planck units start acting as dynamic Fibonacci variables. Then the universe just rapidly punches through 12 clunky, jagged, highly volatile iterations. We're talking a messy soup of raw matter crashing around in chaotic fury. But then, the magic happens, the 13th refinement. The whole cosmic engine just smooths out. The ratio locks in perfectly at exactly 1.618, and that initial chaos beautifully stabilizes into the smooth space, or the vacuum manifold that we all gracefully float through today. Which actually brings us to a really radical redefinition of a famous quantum mystery. Standard quantum entanglement tells us that particles can be spookily connected across vast distances, right? Well, the PHFC framework introduces something called the quantum snap. The crucial point here is that entanglement is simply particles sharing the exact same pixel anchor in that fractal geometry. When we measure a particle, it doesn't just mysteriously choose a state. Actually, it undergoes what's called a re-indexing event. The particle literally snaps from its shared coordinate over to a brand new local coordinate ID. It's essentially a fundamental update to the universe's internal filing system. All right, Section 3. Bridging the macro and the subatomic. Let's see how these worlds connect.
So, visualizing this shift to a unified geometry is super helpful. Usually, when we align a standard 1550 nanometer photon inside a silica waveguide, we represent it with just flat magenta and blue waves. But if we shift to a reconfigured 3D phase-shifted perspective, it totally changes the game. It reveals these components interacting as precise 3D geometry relative to the electron scale.
To truly appreciate what we're conceptualizing here, we really have to ground ourselves in the sheer, mind-boggling scale difference. Okay, that guided optical channel of the glass core is 8.2 micrometers. The quantum wave packet riding through it is 1,550 nanometers. But the classical electron radius? That is a microscopic 2.82 femtometers. Just think about that for a second. A single electron is approximately 550 million times smaller than the light's wavelength.
Establishing precise mathematical geometry across that massive of a divide is an absolutely monumental leap for unified physics. The secret to unlocking this entire new perspective is completely mechanical. By simply rotating that blue magnetic field exactly 90 degrees on axis right into the horizontal plane, we finally step away from those traditional flat 2D models. Suddenly, we can see distinct, perpendicular, orthogonal waves, and they aren't interacting as separate lines anymore. They are a unified helical structure locking together precise subatomic geometry.
Which brings us to Section 4, Oxygen Core Convergence, specifically looking at Fractal ion banding.
Let's look at what happens when foundational subatomic rules manifest during atom interactions. When we examine oxygen core convergence under this model, we're looking at two oxygen atoms, but they aren't just loosely sharing electrons in some empty void. No way. They are powerfully bound together by this complex, glowing, multi-layered matrix known as toroidal ion banding.
This spatial matrix mechanically locks the oxygen nuclei at an exact equilibrium separation of 121 picometers. The energy isn't just randomly flowing between them either. It's strictly routed through highly structured primary ion transfer channels, which are then stabilized by that multi-layer toroidal banding. The end result is just a masterfully organized architecture called a stabilized ionic resonance braid. It's basically seeing chemistry as pure, highly engineered quantum geometry.
Moving on to Section 5, the V14 interaction chamber and subsystem architecture. If we zoom in even further into how quantum engineering actively manipulates these rules within a closed system, we find the Synthros V14 architecture. Specifically, the interaction chamber's subsystem operates as this incredible mechanism for actively processing quantum states. A state traverses directly into an intense toroidal flow generator right in the center, and it outputs as a perfectly stabilized product.
You can kind of think of this chamber like a highly advanced cosmic car wash. So the input is a raw single photonic state, which is characterized by redshift continuity. It hits that central toroidal flow generator and undergoes what's called orthogonal resonance locking. Basically, it forces all those chaotic geometrical alignments tightly into place, like heavy-duty scrubbers locking right into a groove. And the output, you get a perfectly stabilized, linear electronic state that is now blue shift polarity locked. It literally converts quantum chaos into structured, usable geometry. It's absolutely brilliant.
And finally, Section 6, Cosmic Dynamics and Syntropy. We are zooming way, way out now, because the PHFC framework scales up to radically reframe one of the most terrifying objects in space, black holes. Now, the classic concept paints a black hole as a singularity, right? An infinitely dense point where physics just breaks and stops making any sense. But under the concept of toroidal transmission, black holes are actually two-way pressure valves. They don't destroy information. Instead, they compress unique local logic into a binary 1 and jet it out into unutilized fractal sectors of the void. They are literally cosmic seeds, continuously creating entirely new daughter universes.
Now you might be wondering, if black holes are constantly birthing daughter universes left and right, why isn't the cosmos just one massive, catastrophic traffic jam? Well, the framework explains this through something called phase variance layering. Because reality is a discrete partition, multiple partitions can coexist within the exact same fractal substrate, essentially the exact same physical space, simply by operating at different phase cycles. It's exactly like having different radio stations broadcasting through the same room. You tune into one, you don't hear the other. So you end up with infinite, non-interfering, co-located universes stacked infinitely right on top of each other.
And this macro-scale view provides a massive breakthrough for physics, one torus stability. Let's talk about the infamous three-body problem. In traditional physics, predicting the motion of three interacting celestial bodies is mathematically chaotic and incredibly frustrating. The VORTX model actually solves this headache entirely. Instead of trying to track three separate gravity wells, it tracks the shared center of gravity as the single primary toroidal node. The planets, or the stars themselves, they are merely secondary harmonics. They're just physical manifestations of that central mathematical pixel maturing out there in space. Which leaves us with this final, truly staggering thought to wrap up today's explainer. We have scaled from the absolute tiniest stabilized point of reality, navigating through orthogonal resonance locking and oxygen core convergence, all the way up to the birth of co-located universes. So, if a single, mathematically refined pixel scaling at the golden ratio can govern both the delicate subatomic geometry of a guided electron and simultaneously dictate the centropic spin of massive multi-star galaxies,
What breathtaking mysteries might these toroidal daughter universes hold next? The sheer scalability of the PHFC framework is truly mesmerizing. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep your curiosity expanding.